This presentation is on African-American author Harriet Ann Jacobs, who lived from 1813 to 1897, and the slave narrative, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, written by herself. Who is Harriet Ann Jacobs? Harriet Ann Jacobs was born a slave in Edenton, North Carolina in 1813, and she spent her first 6 years happily with her parents until her mother died, and then she was taken from her home to work in her white owner's home. Her new mistress was kind to her and taught her to read and spell and how to work as a seamstress. When she was 12, though, her mistress died and her good fortune changed. She was willed to a 3-year-old daughter of a physician, whom Jacobs calls Dr. Flint in her narrative. He made persistent sexual advances on her and moved her to her own cabin 4 miles away from his jealous wife, where he could sexually assault Jacobs. Jacobs' master denied her permission to marry another black man, so she attempted a level of escape by becoming the mistress of another white man who was a more respected man in town, with whom she had 2 children. She then plotted her own escape from slavery when she began hiding in a very small attic above her grandmother's porch, where she hid for 7 years until 1842, when local friends and anti-slavery organizations in the North helped her escape to New York City, where she became a children's nurse and became reunited with her own children. Eventually, her employer bought her freedom from her former owners, who had hired slave catchers to find her and posted rewards for her capture. The year after she gained her freedom, she began writing Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, written by herself, and had it published in 1861. Overview of Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl is the first book-length narrative by an ex-slave that reveals the unique brutalities inflicted on enslaved women. Critics have dismissed the work as fiction since she changes the names of the people, including herself, whom she calls Linda Brent. The author seems too well educated for a former slave, and some of the events in the narrative, such as hiding in an attic for 7 years, seem unbelievable. However, the civil rights and women's movements during the 1960s caused a renewed interest in Jacobs' slave narrative, and scholarly research has since proven the authenticity of her story. Jacobs' narrative was one of the many slave narratives published in the years leading up to the Civil War, but hers was unique in its emphasis of the psychological and moral degradation suffered specifically by female slaves who were sexually exploited, as well as the targets of the jealous fury of white mistresses. Slave narratives. Slave narratives are first-person autobiographies of enslaved black Americans who describe the horrors of slavery and tell the story of their escape to freedom. The primary goal of slave narratives is to gain sympathy of white readers and gain support for the abolitionist movement. Slave narratives first appeared in the United States around 1703, but most were published during the era of abolitionism, from 1831 to the end of the Civil War in 1865. Slave narratives had to include a testimonial or letter of authenticity, generally written by a white editor or abolitionist and friend of the narrator, which were needed in order for them to be published. Common themes are quest for freedom and or literacy, search for home, redemption and salvation, deliverance from evil, and crossing boundaries. Like Negro spirituals, slave narratives were considered dangerous and subversive by slaveholders who feared they might incite slave revolts and riots. Memorable quotes from Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. Reader, be assured this narrative is no fiction. I am aware that some of my adventures may seem incredible, but they are, nevertheless, strictly true. I have not exaggerated the wrongs inflicted by slavery. On the contrary, my descriptions fall far short of the facts. These are the words Jacobs used to introduce her narrative in an attempt to convince mostly white readers that it was a true story. Ironically, many were still not convinced of its authenticity until research in the 20th century proved the events to be true. Slavery is terrible for men, but it is far more terrible for women. Superadded to the burden common to all, they have wrongs and sufferings and mortifications, particularly their own. Her narrative shows the additional tortures female slaves suffered in addition to those of male slaves. They are also sexually assaulted and then retaliated against by their mistresses, as well as torn from their children. Pity me and pardon me, O virtuous reader, you never knew what it is to be a slave, to be entirely unprotected by law or custom, to have the law reduce you to the condition of a chattel, entirely subject to the will of another. This quote summarizes the purpose of her narrative, to show the cruelty of slavery, particularly in dehumanization of treating slaves as less than humans who are denied basic human rights. God judges men by their hearts, not by the color of their skins. This quote reveals the injustice of racism. She may be an ignorant creature degraded by the system that has brutalized her from childhood, but she has a mother's instincts and is capable of feeling a mother's agonies. Jacobs' narrative argues that slaves are human beings with human emotions, a direct contradiction to the Southern view of slaves as less than human. And lastly, I resolve not to be conquered again. This quote reveals Jacobs' determination and strength that is exhibited throughout the narrative.